Former Undersecretary of Defense Robert Wilkie. He was also the former Secretary of Veterans Affairs in the first Trump administration. Mr. Secretary, you and I were speaking last week. You said it's going to happen.
Yes.
And it's happening. Your initial reaction to what you've seen so far?
Well, the first thing, the Times of Israel is now reporting that they believe that the Supreme Leader is dead. They are reporting that they're getting that from Israeli sources, that he was likely killed in the first attack that Israel launched today. We will probably see a pre-recorded message from the Supreme Leader, one that was probably recorded months or weeks ago. Look, this is something that Sarah actually has been talking about for a long time. You take out the Iranian regime, and you have altered the balance of power, not just in the Middle East, but this impacts Russia and its supplies to fight the Ukrainians. This impacts China because it loses its outpost in the Middle East, and shows the world that, look, they weren't incapable of defending Maduro. They're incapable of defending Assad. They were incapable of defending the Ayatollahs. And the other thing that you're seeing is the Arab nations. Look, they believe that the Shia regime is not only a deadly threat to them, but they also believe they're heretical. This has many strange. And Tom, look, you know from the region and your time with the Coalition Provisional Authority exactly what that means.
Yeah.
So we'll be in this for a week or so. This has to be a comprehensive air campaign.
Mr. Secretary, talk to me about where we go from here. If the reports are true that what the Times of Israel is saying is correct, that the Supreme Leader is dead, and that can be confirmed, does that end this, or do you believe that this could still be, it would be necessary for it to continue for some time?
It has to be, because as Zach was reporting, look, the Chinese were offloading as quickly as they could in the few ports that Iran had open. Ballistic missile components. The Iranians were working at breakneck speed to revamp their ballistic missile capability. And look, that was the thing that President Trump told them. Wasn't the nuclear issue was a facade, because most of that's been destroyed. It was their ballistic missile capability and their desire to develop missiles that could even hit the United States proper. They were unwilling to negotiate, give those up, didn't think they would. So what you're seeing now is a comprehensive strike at their ability to terrorize the region, and also their ability to terrorize their own people.
Mr. Secretary, stick with us. I want to add into the conversation here Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus. He's a former spokesperson for the Israel Defense Forces and senior fellow for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Lieutenant Colonel, just to elaborate further on what Secretary Wilkie just said, the reports coming out of Times of Israel that the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has in fact potentially looks like he may have been killed in these Israeli strikes earlier. The preliminary assessment suggests this, according to not only Times of Israel, but also Channel 12 and Ynet there. How much light can you shed on that?
Yeah, that's based on, of course, offline conversations with Israeli defense officials. That is the working assumption that we currently have in Israel. Still, you know, conservative. There's a lot of information that suggests that he was indeed eliminated, but until we have final confirmation, Israel isn't going to say it officially. But, and you know, just for reference, historic reference, it took a few days to confirm that Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, was eliminated in Lebanon. It also took quite a few hours, or maybe a day or so, when Israel took out Ismail Haniyeh, a Hamas leader in Tehran, a year and a half ago. So these things take time. But the fact that the Israeli establishment is willing to release that and say that there are strong indications that the so-called Supreme Leader of Iran was indeed eliminated, that is significant. In addition, the military commander of the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Forces, reportedly also eliminated a General Pakpour is his name, and perhaps also the Iranian defense minister. So the assumptions now are that the early strikes, the opening salvo by Israel and the US against prime personnel targets, political and military, appears to have been successful, but not yet confirmed.
Colonel Conricus, going back to what we heard from Zach Anders in Tel Aviv, we've seen a very limited response so far, kind of ones and twos in terms of ballistic missiles. Is the fact that we've seen such a limited response perhaps an indication that the leadership of the regime was taken out in that initial strike?
No, I wouldn't draw the connection with that. I would more likely assess that the initial strike by Israel and the US on Iranian missile launchers and launch sites was so successful that it significantly impeded the ability of the Iranian regime to fire missiles. I have no other logical explanation, because what we were anticipating were at least dozens, if not hundreds, of missiles to be fired from Iran at Israel. That is not what we've seen yet, and I'm very grateful for the fact that we do not yet have casualties in Israel. I assume that will eventually change and that they'll fire lots of missiles. But currently, I am positively surprised by how effective Israeli and American suppression of Iranian missile capabilities has been. That's definitely worrying for the Iranian regime. This is their only or perhaps most important weapon that they have, which is capable of striking. That may be one of the reasons why they decided so early in the game to actually start firing at Gulf countries, at Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, etc., which many analysts, myself included, I thought would be much later in the game. And to me, it signals Iranian frustration or perhaps even really panic in the situation that they find themselves in.
Yeah, I'm going to ask this question to both of you, but Secretary Wilkie, I'll bring you back into the conversation first. If the Ayatollah has been assassinated, successfully taken out, what does this mean for the ongoing operation that is expected to continue for the next few days?
Well, first of all, I agree with what the colonel said, that this has to go on for much longer, because you have to eliminate the regime's instruments of terror. You also, and that encourages people to take the streets. Remember, in 1979, what finally toppled the Shah was the emergence on the streets of Iran's vast population of young people. I mean, this country has the youngest population of any major nation on the planet, nations of over 50 to 80 million people. So that's one thing to see. But let me just add something else to what the colonel said. The strategy of the Islamic Republic has been to absorb a first blow from Israel or the United States, and then launch massive ballistic missile barrages against Israel in particular. And now that we're seeing these attacks on the Emiratis, on Saudi, on Jordan, that's a sign that not only did Israel do an incredible job last year, but that this attack has really, really limited the regime's ability to strike back. They do have redundancy, and the colonel can speak to this more than I can, in terms of their political leadership. The Ayatollah's son, if he's still alive, perhaps Laranjani, who is really the black presence behind the Ayatollah. But as each day goes by and the ability of the regime to terrorize its people wanes, then that redundancy may not be worth much.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.